So, recording is in progress. Yay! Hello, everybody. Welcome to a bit of a chat with the editors. Very formal chat with the editors for the upcoming anthology. I think we can say with relative certainty now that it's an upcoming anthology down below, who are kickstarting their project. So who wants to give me the elevator pitch for what the comic or what the anthology is? Paul?
Gary, you go.
Okay.
But let Gary do talking.
All right.
He gets to talk about turning roads all the time. So for Down Below is a mashup between Greek mythology and pulp noir crime fiction. So the idea was to try and take ideas, concepts, tales, characters from Greek mythology and look at them through the lens of the crime thriller, through the lens of either film or comic noir. And that kind of came about from, well, last year Paul had done Turning Roads himself, which was putting those science fiction and fantasy takes on stories from Irish folklore. And in the aftermath of that, we thought we were talking about over Zoom pints and Zoom chats about like what a sequel book or what a follow-up book would look like. And I kind of joked at one point, or at least we were just joking, so it was going back and forth about the idea of, well, like all that Greek stuff is very tragic and all, and their tragedy and the sort of the tragic irony is at the heart of most noir crime fiction. There is that kind of like, bittersweetness at the end of a noir piece of noir fiction that is also there in a lot of Greek myths. We were also playing Hades a lot at the time, so that definitely influenced it.
But, and listening to Hades Town.
Yeah, and listening to Hades Town. So we were kind of in that space, but the more we thought about it, the more it kind of made sense that there was kind of that commonality between Greek mythology and crime fiction, and noir crime fiction in particular. So then we kind of said, well, we can do it as that. And then because I had done a lot of crime fiction in my comic work prior to that, Paul asked me to come on board to co-edit it, and I was delighted to do that. Did I do well, Paul? Is that good enough elevator pitch for what we're doing?
That's too long for an elevator pitch. They would have already gotten off.
This is more of a waiting room pitch. I think that's the reference to that.
This is Forrest Gump sitting on the bench.
Oh, so can we get a box of chocolates for Gary? And in fairness, that's actually not a bad analogy for anthologies, because you never know what you're going to get with a bunch of short stories like this. Yeah, I know. But as kind of in reference to that, so you have already picked your stories, okay? You had an open call for submissions. How many submissions in total did you get?
189.
Okay, and you had to whittle that down to how many stories?
20 then plus the ones that we had for ourselves. So we had to reject 169 pitches, which was...
Wow.
Oof.
So that must have been a whole process. So how did you pick your flavor of chocolate, so to speak?
I think we both took slightly different approaches to starting. So I read everything completely blind before I looked at any of the art teams. So I was literally just reading the pitches and leaving comments on the pitches. And then I'd look at the portfolios. I think Gary, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Gary would read the pitch and then look at the art team and make a comment on the whole thing in one go. And after we had both kind of yes or no on different things, literally just, to try and make the list slightly shorter than 189. Then we spoke through the rest and didn't quite argue over them. I think we were actually... Pardon?
Zoom session, I think. It's probably 3 or 4 hours over Zoom between kind of... We split it up, but that's probably how long we ended up spending chatting about the shortlist.
Yeah, that was after we had already whittled everything down ourselves. Yeah. And... If we couldn't make a good enough argument to take one in that the other person was humming and hawing over, then we just had to say no, because we both needed to be able to work on it.
Well, you also had a lot of options to be able to do that with, which makes it slightly easier to go, okay, well, this is good, but if I have one reservation, I guess that has to exclude it.
Yeah.
What was probably the most common reservation that came up for you? And you don't have to be specific about anyone's particular work, but like, was there a certain thing where like, okay, I liked a lot of comics, but some of them had, you know, a common problem of maybe not being accurate enough to the pitch details, like the things that we were looking for.
I think we had separate problems because
Yeah.
we both came at it from different sides. I was very particular of this doesn't read like the myth, whereas for Gary it was either this isn't noir, or this is someone retelling the myth but just putting a fedora on top.
Yeah, it was almost too true to myth. It was like beat for beat the same thing, except now the gods are gangsters, which we both kind of felt was like, you can do it. It's not the most interesting way to go down this path. Like, there's a lot of scope you can for playing with the ideas at the core of a myth. Particularly in something like Greek mythology, which is so well known and it's been so well studied. Like, entire courses, master courses, PhDs are done on this. One of our contributors is his day job is he's a lecturer in this stuff and is doing a PhD on Greek mythology.
Oh, Oliver.
So like, yeah, Oliver. And this is something like, you know, that people study in depth for like their entire careers. So like, just retelling a myth isn't enough of itself. Like, you have to. For me, one of the big things was like, what spin are you putting on it, or what lessons are you learning from it and applying? Because like, I think one of the more interesting things you can do in any sort of a anthology where you get a prompt like this is to take the core of what the prompt is telling you, and then like take the core, like, what is the story of Sisyphus, or what is the story of Hermes, or any of these kind of Orpheus, Eurydice. What is it actually about? And then rather than telling just that story again, be like, okay, that's what the story is about, and here's a story inspired by that thematic core. Like, those were the ones that stood out to me more, and those were the ones that tended to do better when it came down to narrowing down, particularly when you had a lot of people who were touching on the same myths. Like, what allowed you to go with one over the other.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's because when people are starting off in comics, one of the things they're often given as a great piece of advice is to make as many short stories as you can, because it's a great lesson to tell like a complete story in restricted space and all that kind of stuff. But like anthologies like this, I think, are also a great lesson in how to adapt stories, which is not something that we always get a chance to learn about, because like you said, you kind of have to choose the core elements of sometimes with myths, especially a very long, big, ranging operatic story into 4 pages, and how do you what elements do you cherry pick? So you guys both have stories in the anthology yourselves. Tell us a little bit about them. So Paul, you go first. Like, tell me like how you kind of decided what story you wanted to do.
So for me, I picked Pandora. And part of it was I wanted to write a version of Pandora that was probably closer to the earlier versions of the Pandora myth in terms of how she's treated, rather than what the disgruntled white male artists were doing later on in Greek history, because they turned it from Pandora was brought along with the box to the box was Pandora's problem and she opened the box and destroyed the world, basically. Because the whole thing is that the box, which is really an urn, because they didn't have boxes with lids in ancient Greece, it was an urn. Might have had a lid, but it was still an urn, like you could put ashes into. And
that's fun. I never actually knew that about that. Yeah.
And so the more feminist reading of it is that Pandora was she was brought down, made by the gods, everything she has made by the gods, with this thing that once it's opened, it unleashes all the bad things in the world. But she's not the one who opens it originally, and she was revered in the temple of Athena. She's at the base of the statue in the temple of Athena. So like, she was a very important part of Athena's story, and then she's turned into a villain by men.
There's no example of that in history, Paul.
Yeah. So I wanted to tell the story where, you know, Pandora is doing something good and where the urn is important but not a thing that will destroy the world as soon as it's opened, because there's going to be application to it, and where I wanted her to be the hero of the story, which is kind of a very literal thing. And I bring in Hermes and kind of have like, well, you owe me because you kind of left me in the middle of all this mess. So yeah, I play with a few different pulpy things, but I wanted to like put a positive light on Pandora because I think she gets a bad rep.
And Gary, what about yours?
So I've taken the myth of Sisyphus, and one of the reasons I chose that because with my story, when Paul was doing that idea that was kind of focusing on going back to the early versions of these myths and some of the kind of the groundwork of it and how they've been reinterpreted, one of the things I wanted to do was I really wanted to kind of make sure that the story not only tied into those kind of thematic chords of the myth, but also was feeding into the tone of a noir story and what that should be. And a lot of noir stories, whether they're in comics or film, they're all about a never-ending struggle, really. Like the protagonists, because I won't say heroes, of many noir stories are people who are going up against systems or entrenched problems in society that they're never going to be able to fully defeat. So the PI in a noir story isn't ever going to be able to bring down the whole of crime in a city, or the police or the cop is never going to be able to fix crime fully, to the extent you believe that cops can do that. But even in those things, like they're always going up against systems that are much more powerful than them, and which they can only ever hope to make a slight difference or a slight impact on. And so that has mirrors in the theme or the myth of Sisyphus, with someone who's constantly doing the same thing over and over and not getting anywhere, and whatever satisfaction they have on completing a given task is quickly subsumed by the never-ending cycle of, well, I'm just going to have to do this again and again and again. And so I wanted to kind of...
That's a great description you were giving of noir, though, as a genre, because I think that is a genre that I think a lot of people have difficulty putting a finger on as what makes something noir. And I think a lot of people lean on like kind of like atmosphere, like, you know, the visuals aspect of it, the setting a lot of the time, but like, yeah, like there's a storytelling theme to noir that I think a lot of people overlook, and that's I really like that description of it and made me think differently about it, actually, which is quite cool. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to quickly get you guys to just also mention about kind of, so you got pitches from all these people and you've chosen them, but you've kind of chosen them sight unseen. These are not finished comics. You don't know how they're going to be by the end. So is there any right now, if you could pick one off the top of your head, that you're kind of excited to see how it turns out, because like the pitch was intriguing, but you don't know exactly how they're going to do it? Is there one in the back of your head where you're kind of like, oh, I'm excited to see how they actually do this one?
Go on, Paul.
I'm literally looking through the list to try.
Yeah, I sprung this question on you. I should have prepared you for that one.
I think like one of the ones that we were both excited for when we read it was Dave Hendrick and Pete Mary's, which is, it's called Miss C.
It's the 30s one.
Actual name, The Bulletin Miss C. It's a Cersei story, which is pretty cool.
All right. Cersei is slightly unknown kind of story in Greek mythology.
Yeah, like we have we've actually got 3 what's his name? Odysseus, 3 Odysseus stories, but they're all separate points, so like 3 different parts of his story, so they feel completely separate anyway in the Odyssey. So we've got 3 different aspects of looking at one character, right, and the different sort of monsters that he's facing, whether they be the suitors or Cersei or the Cyclops.
Nice.
Which will be it like, so there's a lot of cool approaches just to one character, and while we never like doubling up on things, they were all so distinct and looking at the character in such different ways that unless you knew they were all Odysseus, you wouldn't go, well, this is the same thing.
Well, that's what one of the cool things about Greek myth is that there's a crossover. I mean, it's the original Marvel cinematic universe where like people can just show up in each other's stories. Like the story I have in the book, which is about Echo. I mean, she shows up in the like other stories as well. So like, there's it's a cool crossover within itself. Gary, did you think of one?
Yeah, I think just off the top of my head, I'm very interested in I mentioned earlier, I'm very interested in seeing what Oliver and Alex do with their Dionysus story.
Yes.
Because of the level of knowledge is that those guys are going to bring to the story is going to be very, very interesting. And they're just after coming off the Red Sonja, Black, White, and Red story that they did together for Dynamite recently. So those two are at the top of their game. So I'm just really excited for them to be able to work on something that I know from chatting with them both, they're both really, really passionate about, both professionally and then artistically.
Nice.
And somehow we got them into the book.
So there's still time for people to support the campaign. When is it finished?
I think the date is April 10th, but don't quote me.
Yeah.
It's about 2 weeks.
Okay, and
It is April 10th.
As we speak, I think we're less than I think we're something like 800 left to raise to hit the Kickstarter goal. So
yeah.
It should be pretty fully funded pretty soon. So it's kickstarter.com /
Yeah, but you're better off just going to liverbreakcomics.com because trying to spell out the entire URL would take a while.
It's just difficult. All right, yeah. So I'll put the link for the for all of it for Limit Break and the Kickstarter directory in the description of this video. But yes, do check it out. And even if you don't get to back it in time, check it out afterwards. You'll have printed copies available to buy in the shops. All right. Thanks, Paul Carroll, Gary Moloney. Thanks for joining me today, and thanks for having me in the Kickstarter and in the project. Cheers.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.